And since the Tokugawa Shogunate brought so much peace to Japan, now they can focus on really reforming the country and rebuilding it after centuries of civil war. Keep in mind that the country had been basically in a state of war since the late 1300s, the early 1400s. So, there had been a lot of damage. Now that the country's at peace, there's really a chance to reform and create a new Japan that everybody can enjoy. And because the Tokugawa were ruling from Edo, it was isolated enough, they were very powerful, people were scared to go against them. There was no opposition against them. And basically everybody made sure to follow the rules of the Tokugawa Shogunate very, very carefully. Many of these reforms are going to be enacted by the third shogun, who was the son of the second shogun Hidetada, and so Ieyasu's grandson. His name was Tokugawa Iemitsu, so he ruled in the 1630s and 1640s. So these 2 decades are where the reforms of the Edo period are really enacted. He was a brilliant shogun, probably one of the best of the Tokugawa period, and he sets up a really good foundation for the Tokugawa Shogunate. We can thank him for Japan being at peace, and very, very grounded, really, for the next 250 years. So one of the reforms that might have been negative, depending on what you think, but it did help the country at that time, was the Tokugawa divided society up into 4 classes. So you were basically born into one of these 4 social classes, and you could not move up. You could not move from one social class to another. Okay, in other words, if you were born into a farming family, you could not move up and become a samurai, like Hideyoshi, right? Or if you were born into the merchant class, you could not change your profession and become a farmer. Okay, you had to stay in that social class, and you could not move up, right? And you could not change your profession. You had to stay there. And also, intermarriage was not allowed. So if you were the daughter of a farmer, you could not marry the son of a samurai. Or if you were the son of a craftsman, you could not marry the daughter of a farmer, right? So there was a very, very, very strict class system, class structure. And the imperial family and aristocrats, you might notice, do not fall anywhere into this triangle because they are special, right? The imperial family is divine, and the aristocrats are kind of grandfathered into that as well. So they are sort of out of this triangle. They're their own special class that is not transcends a social class system. So the samurai are at the top, right? They're the ruling class of the Tokugawa Shogunate, and of course, because they're at the top, they have the most privileges. And if you were a samurai, you had to live in the castle town of your province, right? So if you lived in the province, you had to live in the mansion surrounding the castle, so that if the castle was attacked ever, you could defend it. You were the frontline defenders. And the samurai are the ones who are responsible for laying down the law of the land. They're the go-to people to determine the country's future. And they were the only class that was allowed to wear swords publicly, and they could execute a member of any lower class for any offense. So if you're a farmer and a samurai perceives that you insulted them or you didn't show them enough respect, you could be cut down and executed without any explanation. Okay? But this is very interesting because samurai, the warrior class, is basically around to fight. Okay, and that's what they did during the Warring States period. But during the Edo period, the country's at peace. There's no more fighting. So what are the samurai going to do all day? How are they going to make their money, right? The stipend is not enough. They're not going to war, so they have nothing to do. They get bored. So a lot of samurai actually rely on agriculture to survive. So you have kind of hybrid samurai farmers who have land, they till the land, they harvest crops and so on, but they're samurai. Then they have to do this because there's no war, so they have nothing to do all day long. Interestingly enough, the farmers who have always been at the bottom of the barrel are now the second most influential class in the Edo period. Okay, the shogunate really, really respected the farmers because they were the ones who produced food. And in Neo-Confucian philosophy, farmers had to be respected because they're responsible for feeding the entire country. Okay, but I don't want you to think that just because farmers now have this new respected social class does not mean that they suddenly have their lives change for the better. Respect doesn't really mean anything if you don't do anything for the people, right? So farmers are not privileged because there was essentially sharecropping systems still, even after all these centuries, where farmers lived on the lands of rich plantation-owning people, and they had to give all the rights to the landlords and only kept a little bit for themselves. Okay, so this system hasn't changed. The only thing that changed is farmers move up on the totem pole, and but that doesn't really help them economically or financially. Okay, so they're not privileged, although they are respected more now. But it's just a formality. Artisans are number 3, okay, on the triangle. So they're actually below farmers, even though they're much more richer than farmers, right? So if you were an artist, you're a sword maker, anyone who creates any kind of work is an artisan. Okay, and because the country's at peace, popular culture is flourishing during the Edo period. Now that people are at peace, they can think about the finer things of life, and so artisans become very very wealthy because they're producing these nice things and people are buying them. So it's interesting that they're actually more wealthy than the farmers, but they're lower than them on the social class triangle. And at the bottom of the barrel, it's the merchants. Okay, and the reason they're at the bottom is, according to Confucian ideology, merchants are considered the lowest of the low because they have to rely on selling things to make money. So this is considered degrading in Confucian ideology. Okay. But it's interesting because the country's at peace now, so the economy is really flourishing. Japan's economy gets really good because the Japanese they're alive now. There's peace. They're happy. They're content, especially city dwellers. And because they're content, they can spend, just like with the artisans, they can buy whatever they want. So the economy is really flourishing, and merchants are becoming extremely wealthy. Out of the 4 social classes, even more than the samurai, the merchants become the wealthiest of the 4 social classes. Okay, because samurai, they don't really get as much. They have to rely on farming to survive. Farmers, of course, have nothing. Artisans, they're middle class, but they don't have as much as the merchants. The merchants are really bringing home the bacon. So it's a very interesting issue here, where you have the wealthiest social class, the merchants, are actually at the bottom of the barrel. So it's a very interesting scenario. And as I mentioned, the emperor and the aristocrats, they fall outside of these 4 social classes. They have a special position. So since society was so organized now and the country was at peace, during the Edo period, culture and society really began to develop. Okay, and you see culture not only for the aristocrats, not only for the samurai, but for everybody, for all social classes. Whether you're a farmer, whether you're an artisan, you're a merchant, you're exposed to some kind of culture now. Okay, and even peasants. Now a peasant might have an idea of what's happening in the city. He might have an idea of what's out there in the world. Still illiterate, still very, very poor, but the fact that they had a high social status means that they were respected. More attention was being paid to them, on paper at least. Okay, so they're acknowledged and given a high social status for the first time in Japanese history, but it does not change their financial situation or financial lot in life. However, if you notice this triangle class structure system, there is a yellow bar at the very bottom. And they're not included in the 4-level Tokugawa social class caste system, samurai, farmers, craftsmen, and merchants, but we cannot forget the burakumin, or the non-people outcast class. Okay, and this social class, it's basically comprised of people who worked in positions that were considered dirty in Shinto and Buddhism. For example, butchers, blacksmiths, gravediggers, what do they have in common? They're all dealing with death. And remember, death is considered impure in Shintoism. So it was a stigma to be from a butcher family or a gravedigger or something like this, because you were dealing with death, right? So they lived in their own areas. They were not allowed to associate with people from any of the 4 other social classes. Okay? They were considered non-entities, and they were not a part of the social strata at all. Okay, and this continued for centuries. In other words, if you were going to school and you made a friend with somebody, for example, who was from the Burakumin class, your mom would tell you, "Oh, that family is not good. Don't talk to that child," for example. And they were from specific families, and it passed down from parent to child, because you were born in that family, right? And this, according to the Edo period class system, you couldn't move out of your class. There was no moving across or above, going from social class to social class. So it's very sad that even today there's some, still a little bit of stigma, although there's a lot of social awareness now of burakumin and it's not acceptable anymore. But still, some people, some conservative people are very against associating with people who came from burakumin families. Although in Japan today, it's illegal to discriminate against anyone based on their name or their family background. Some interesting notes on Christianity. Like Hideyoshi, the Tokugawa shoguns, including Ieyasu and his descendants, they did not like Christianity. They were very suspicious. And remember that one of Hideyoshi's reforms in 1587 was the prohibition of Christianity. But this ban was not as successful as Hideyoshi would have liked, because soon he got very busy with the war in Korea and Sekigahara and his death, and all these things started happening. So Christians were able to practice secretly, underground. So there were lots of missionaries who were secretly, they were pretending they were traders, but they were really missionaries, and they were going around and trying to convert people, especially in Kyushu. So there was a lot of underground Christian activity. So in 1614, right before the Battle of Osaka, Ieyasu issues an edict banning Christianity and prohibiting missionary activity, but this was ignored. And the reason people ignored it was because this is right before the Battle of Osaka. Ieyasu didn't have time to enforce this. He had other bigger fish to fry. So for the next 20 years or so, many Christians continued their religious activity, in Kyushu especially. But there was persecution. If you were found to be Christian, you could be persecuted. So in 1637, a young Christian from Kyushu, his name was Shiro Amakusa, he rebelled against the Tokugawa Shogunate. He said, I'm going to basically rebel against them because they're persecuting Christians of my faith. So thousands of other Japanese Christians, mostly in Kyushu, this is all happening in Kyushu, which is sort of the center of Christianity in Japan, many other Japanese Christians joined the rebellion. And this is called the Shimabara Rebellion of 1637. And in order to combat this rebellion, the Tokugawa Shogunate, they send an army of 125,000 people from Edo to Kyushu to go against the Christian rebels. And the Christian rebels only had 30,000 people. Very inexperienced fighters compared to the expert armies of the Tokugawa Shogunate. So vastly outnumbered. And of course, the Tokugawa easily defeated the rebels. There was no chance of them going against the Tokugawa. After all, they were vastly outnumbered. Amakusa was caught and executed, and any Japanese Christian who had participated in the rebellion, or even if you were just a Christian, you were caught and you were crucified, right, publicly, or they were beheaded, or they were thrown into these boiling pits of sulfur that Kyushu has. There's a lot of sulfur in Kyushu, so they were thrown into those sulfur pits just for being Christians. So the Tokugawa were not messing around. They wanted to prove a point that if anybody rebels against them, this is what's going to happen to you. And these are some images of Shiro Amakusa holding his cross. And if you can see their placard, their flag, was an image of a Christian cross. And this is their attempt to go against the Tokugawa, which ended up in disaster. And so in order to make of course, there's really no way for them to find out if you're Christian or not. So in order to catch underground Christians, the Tokugawa had this very interesting system that lasted for basically 200 years after this, until the end of the Edo period. They would force many people in Kyushu or elsewhere who were suspected of being Christians. They would have these kinds of mats of Christian images, either Jesus or the Virgin Mary or other religious artwork, and they would force you to step on them or spit on them or defile them in some way. And whoever refused to or could not do it was then exposed to be a Christian and was executed. And this is an image of such a scene where you have a magistrate who's looking over suspected Christians, and they're all being forced to trample on these images. They're called fumie. And if you can do it, then okay, you're not a Christian, fine, you're off the hook. If you can't do it or you refuse to do it, you're a Christian, you're going to be put to death. So this happened for the majority of the Edo period, although a lot of Christians hid their faith and they did it, but a lot of people couldn't, and they were thus exposed. So after the Shimabara rebellion was subdued by the Tokugawa, and after a lot of Christians were executed, Shogun Iemitsu sends out an official national proclamation which prohibits and bans Christianity. Okay, and other people have Hideyoshi did this too, but Iemitsu takes it one step further. In addition to banning Christianity officially, he also enacts what is called the National Seclusion Policy. And what in Japanese it's called sakoku. And what National Seclusion Policy means is, from the 1630s on, Japan is going to be closed off and isolated from the rest of the world. What is this?